Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Mem Hey Amud Beis. Starting with Daf Mem Hey Amud Aleph, 6 lines from the bottom. Our Mishnah states, Botzek shebesidkei arevo, if there's dough in the cracks of the bowl that's used for kneading. So it depends. If there is a kazayis b'mokum echad, tzorich levar, you have to get rid of that chametz. However, if it's less than a kazayis, then it's bottle. So the Gemara comments by bringing two different statements. The first lashon of the Gemara is that which it states in the Mishnah that you have a kazayis b'mokum echad, that you have to mavair, that's talking about in a place of the bowl that's not osuin lechazik, that means the wall of the bowl. There, we're not concerned about water seeping through. But on the bottom of the bowl, however, there, if you have a kazayis on the bottom point where it's mokum lechazik, then you don't have to mavair. The second lashon of the Gemara says no. It says that which it states that b'mokum lechazik, it's talking on the seif of the Mishnah. When it's less than a kazayis, you don't have to mavair in the mokum lechazik. That means in the bottom of the bowl where there'll be water seeping through. Then you don't have to mavair such chametz if it's less than a kazayis. But if it's another mokum, on let's say the walls of the bowl, then if it's less than a kazayis, you would have to mavair. It comes out that the first lashon is mekil, the second lashon is machmir. The first lashon is mekil on 2 counts. It says, first of all, a kazayis does not have to be mevuar if it's going to be in the place of lechazik, on the bottom, let's say, of the bowl. That's one kula. A second kula is that even if it's not in the place where it's lechazik, it's on the wall of the bowl, but in less than a kazayis, you would not have to mavair. The second lashon is machmir on both counts. The second lashon says that even if there's a mokum that's lechazik, so there, if it's a kazayis, you have to mavair. It's only if it's less than a kazayis, you would not have to mavair. And if it's a place that's not lechazik, so even if it's going to be less than a kazayis, you'd have to mavair. So again, the reisha, meaning the first lashon, is mekil, the second lashon is machmir. The Gemara now brings Tanya Kalishna Kamo, Tanya Kalishna Basra. We have a brisa that supports the first lashon, the lashon that is going to be mekil, and we have a second brisa that supports the second lashon, which is machmir, as follows. Tanya Kalishna Kamo. We have a brisa like the first lashon. Botzek shes besidkei arevo b'mokom ha'asui lechazik. If you have dough in the cracks of the kneading bowl, in a place where it's made lechazik, again, on the bottom of the bowl, where water would seep through when you pour in the water together with the flour, then it states, Eino choytzetz ve'eino oiver. Rashi learns, Eino choytzetz means if you have the bowl that became tameh, then when you're matbil into the mikvah, so there's no chatzitza. That means that the dough itself is part of the bowl. And for chametz purposes, for Pesach, then you won't be oiver, you won't have to mevar the dough. That's when it's mokom asui lechazik. Mokom she'ein asui lechazik, choytzetz v'oiver, the opposite. If it's in a place, let's say on the side of the bowl, then you would be choytzetz. If you would be matbil the kli, it would make a chatzitza. And also, you'd have to mevar. So this is like the first lashon of the Gemara before, which is mekil. Ba'med dvar mamurim. Now explains why it's mekil. Because ba'med dvar mamurim bekazayis. It's mekil because we're talking about even a kazayis if a mokum lechazik. Aval bepochim bekazayis. I feel mokum she'ein asui lechazik. Eino choytzetz ve'eino oiver. Oh, this is where it becomes clear that this is like the first lashon, because again, if it's a kazayis b'mokom lechazik, then it's not choytzetz, and you're not oiver. And if it's not in a mokom lechazik on the wall of the kli, so then if it's less than a kazayis, again, it's not choytzetz, and you're not oiver. V'tane kalishna basu. Now the Gemara brings a brisa like the second lashon, which is machmir. Again, the same facts. Botek shebesidkei areva b'mokom hasui lechazik. On top of Mem Hey Amud Beis, Eino choytzetz ve'eino oiver. If you have dough that is the cracks that's mokum mechazik. It's not chaytiv ve'eno oiver. B'mokum she'eno asur lechazik chaytiv oiver. That's the same. Now the Brisa explains bamed devar mamurim. This is when it becomes revealed that this is going lechumra. When is this true? That is b'mokum lechazik. You're not oiver and it's not chaytze. It's b'pachos mekezayis. That's only if it's less than a kezayis. Aval bekezayis afilu b'mokum hasui lechazik chaytze v'oiver. But if it's full kezayis, then you would have to then remove it for Pesach. You have to mavar it, and if you would be matbil the kli, you would make a chatzitza. So this is clearly like the second lashon of the Gemara above. Ask the Gemara, Kashya Nahadali. We have these two brises that are now going to pose a contradiction one to the next. The first brisa states if you have a kazayis, b'makom lachazek, so then you don't have to mavar, it's botel. But according to the second brisa, if it's a kazayis, then you would be oiver. You have to mavar it. Says the Gemara, Rav Huna, Sami kilta bekami chamirta. Erase the first brisa in the face of the second brisa. In other words, get rid of the first brisa. That's not going to be a valid brisa. And use the second brisa. In other words, the brisa that is machmir. Rav Yosef objects to this. And he says, Tanoi shaklis me'alma, you're going to remove, you're going to take away the tanoim from the world, as if you can't find a tana that holds of this opinion like the first brisa, the first lashon. Tanoi, it's a machlokes tanoim. The Tanya, it states in the following brisa, hapas she'ipsha chayiv levair mipnei sheruuya l'shoichaka. The brisa begins by saying that bread that has become molded, you are chayiv levair. Why? Because you can still make it into crumbs. Ulechameya bakama isois acheros, and it has the ability to cause other things to become leaven, just like saor. That's the Tanakama, and therefore it's not bottle, even though it's inedible, because it can still bake other things chametz. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Oimer, he argues, Bamed devar mamun. What is this so that you have to mevayer and it's not bottle? That's only if it's going to be used to make something else leaven. That means that it can mechamet something else. Abal koifes saor sheyichado liyeshiva botla. But if you would take a gush, a bunch, a block of this sourdough, of this saor, and you would miyachid it to make it so it's a place for you to sit on, so it's clearly more than a kazayis, then it's bottle. So we see over here, Medom Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar botla, something that's more than a kazayis, he says, would be bottle if it's not going to be used for a food purpose. In this case, it's used for a seat. Michlal, the Tanakama Sover loy botla. The Tanakama would be arguing on that. Alma kisover called kazayis avidim batil loy botil. That means that even he holds that a kazayis, even though we're saying he's going to then get rid of it, he's going to leave it on a permanent basis, he's not interested in it anymore, he's mibatil, still doesn't become nullified. So here we can apply that to our machlokes as well. That when it comes to the kazayis that you're going to put b'mokoim of the lechazek, the kli, in the crack, there on the bottom of the kli, so Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar will say that you're mevatel it, even though it's a kazayis. Whereas the Tanakam over here says no, that you'd have to get rid of it. So we have a machlokes over here, Tanoim, which would then explain the machlokes between the two brises. The first brisa, which is a brisa that is mekil, is like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. The second brisa that is machmir is like the Tanakama. Omar le Abaye terasta bekazayis, pachos mekazayis miterasta. You really explained one stira between the two brises in regards to the kazayis. But what about less than a kazayis? There was also a machlekes, because the first brisa, which is mekil, says that if you have less than a kazayis, even b'makom acher shelo lechazik, namely, let's say, on the wall of the kli, there, he says, you would not have to mevaer. Whereas the second lashon says you would have to mevaer. So therefore, how are you going to be miyashev this? Eloho veho Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. We can explain they're both like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. How? That he's really both brises, but really both brises are speaking about different nekudos, but they really agree. Velo kasha, and it's not a difficulty between the two brises. Why? Ha b'makom lisha. The first brise is talking about b'makom lisha. Ha shalom b'makom lisha. The second brise is talking about shalom b'makom lisha. So that means that the first brise, let's say they have a kneading bowl. There are three parts to the kneading bowl. There's the base, the bottom of the bowl. There is the side of the bowl, the walls, and then you have the top rim around the bowl itself. So when we say that it's the mokom lechazek, so be'etim what we're saying is it's the bottom of the bowl. It's the bottom of the bowl. So when the first brisa says that if you put a kazayas over there, that itself is a place where water will then be. That, he says, is something you don't have to mavire. Whereas then he goes on to say, if it's going to be in a place that's not lechazik, so therefore let's say on the wall of the bowl, so then if it's less than a kazayas, then you won't have to mavire either. But he wasn't speaking about the top of the bowl. And therefore he wasn't talking about the rim. But he would say if it's on the rim itself, even if it's going to be less than a kazayas, he would say that you have to mavire. That's the first lashon. So that first lashon is talking about, this first brisa is talking about, this brisa is talking about specifically in makom lisha, where you need the dough in the bottom of the bowl and also on the sides of the bowl. You don't really need it on the rim. The second brisa is not talking about that. It's talking about the side and the top. So when it says that less than a kazayas, you don't have to mavar, he's talking about the side of the bowl. And he says that which is going to be not less than a kazayas that you have to mavar, he's talking about the top, the rim of the bowl. But he was never speaking about the bottom of the base of the bowl. There he would agree with the first brisa that indeed even a kazayas you don't have to mavar. So both brisos are really altered by Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. I read it inside again. The first brisa was speaking about the makom of the lisha, the hainu, the bottom, the base of the bowl, and the walls of the bowl. Whereas the second brisa was talking about really the rim of the bowl, the side and the rim. It wasn't talking about the base itself. So there's no contradiction. It's all Rav Shimon ben Elazar. Only the two brises were speaking about different places, but they both, of course, agree. Rav Ashi says, to clarify, do not say that he meant to say, not in the makom of the bowl on the outside, even if it's less than a kazayis, then it is something that's a mevayer. But then you would make a diuk and say, but if it's on the rim, then that's something that you would not have to mevar. Ella asifta da agona. Even on the svas, even on the rim of the bowl, you would have to then mevar. Ask the Gemara pshita. That's how we understood. Says the Gemara, no, there's a reason why we say that. Ma'od desema. You might think zimnin da atif umati lahazim. Maybe it will overflow while you're kneading, and it will go on the rim of the bowl, and therefore it's part of the kneading process. Kamash malan, we don't concern about that, and we say you have to then mevar if there was going to be dough on top of the rim. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav, halach Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and the halach like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar over the Tanakama, even if it's a kazayis, then you would not have to mevar. Again, in a place where you would be using it for a non-food purpose that would not become then, or come to leaven something else. Like the case that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar was talking about, where you took that sa'or and you're miyachet it in order to then use it to then sit on. That's what you want to use it for. So then, use mevatel. You don't have to mevar it. Ask the Gemara, Eini, is this so? Omar, you just told me that Rav Nachman said in the name of Rav that's the halacha. The Gemara challenges, Eini, is that so? Omar Rav Yitzchak bar Ashi Amar Rav. But another Amara, Rav Yitzchak bar Ashi said in the name of Rav, a different statement in the name of Rav, Im toch paneh betid batla. If you were to then smear on the surface the tit of this dough, indicating that you now want to use it for sitting on, So then it's going to be bottle. Mashma tachin lo tachlo. Only if you then smeared it with tit, that you did a maisa to make it into then something that you're going to use as a kli, in this case to sit on. Then you don't have to mevarer. But if you did not do that, the mere fact that you just want to sit on it does not then make it, so then that is bottle. So clearly, the halacha is not like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, the way Rav is saying it. So Gemara answers, man de masni loha, lo masni ha. There's two different amoraim in the name of Rav. One teaches his way, the other one teaches the other way. In other words, one of them is correct. One of them said what Rav really said. The other one has made a mistake. We don't know exactly who is the authoritative opinion of Rav. But Ikadami, there's another statement, there's another version that explains, you can explain that they are both so. How? Rav Nachman, Rav. Rav Nachman said in the name of Rav, Ein halacha ke Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. That the halacha is not like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Why? Rav Yitzchak bar Ashem Rav. Because he said in the name of Rav, Im toch paneh betit batla. Only if you were to then first smear tit on the sourdough, then it's now a kli that you're using to sit on, and it's bottle. Otherwise, then you have to mavar such sourdough. And therefore, the halacha would not be like Rishon ben Elazar, who says that you don't have to even make a tit. You don't have to smear any tit on it. The very fact that you want to sit on it is bottle. Says the Gemara weiter, Omar of Nachman, Omar Shmuel, Shnei Chatzoi Zeisim, V'chut Shel Botzek Beineim. If you have an areva, you have a kneading trough, a kneading bowl, and here you have one half a kazayas, and then further away you have another half a kazayas, but in between there is a thin layer of dough, a string, let's say, of dough that connects the two. So says the Gemara, Royin, we see, if you would move the chut that is connecting the two half kezesim, and you would remove that, by moving that, it will also be menatel the pieces, the half kezesim, then you're chayiv levayer. That means there's a connection and there's a starfus between two half kezesim to make a kezayis. V'im lav eino chayiv levayer. But if not, then you have to mevayer. Omar Ula loy amorn ella be'areva. Ula qualifies it. This is only talking about a kneading bowl. Aval bebayis chayiv levayer. But if it's in a house, so then you'd have to mevayer. If it's a half a kazayas in this corner and half a kazayas in a different corner, then you'd have to mevayer. Says Ula. My time. What's the reason? He explains the zimnin the kanish luhu v'nafli gabi adodi. Because when you're sweeping, they'll be gathered together, making a kazayas. Omar Ula. Now Ula says that's in regards to a bias. That a half a kazayas and half a kazayas you have to get rid of, because by sweeping it, you'll then mitztaref the half a kazayas into a kazayas. But he asked, in the west in Eretz Yisrael, they asked the following question. They asked, bias ve'aliyah. If you have a half a kazayas in the bias and a half a kazayas in the aliyah, in the loft above, do you have to mevar that? So the question over here is, here they're in two separate areas. In other words, when you sweep the house, it's a separate sweeping than you do in the loft. But maybe the half the kazayas will fall from the loft into the bias. So what's the din? Bias ve'achsadra ma'o. And if you'll say then a bias ve'aliyah, you would have to, then what about a bias, or you wouldn't have to, but what about a bias ve'achsadra? There, in a bias ve'achsadra, an achsadra really is usually in the extension, let's say, of the bias, and it's opened up from the achsadra going into the bias, and there's constant traffic walking back and forth. So there, maybe you'll say the half of the kazayis in the bias and the half of the kazayis in the achsadra. That might mitztaref, and therefore, what's the din? Do you have to mevar or not? And what happens if you say that, okay, there's a lot of traffic between people in the bias and the achsadra going both directions? But ask the Gemara, Shnei batim ze lifnei mizeh mahu. But if you have two batim, you have one, let's say, room inside the other, you go from the outside only into the inside. It's, let's say, one directional, and it's not as much traffic, then what would you say over there? Does that mitztaref, and therefore you'd have to mevar, or not? Teku. The Gemara leaves all these questions unanswered. Gemara now brings the following brisa: Tanu Rabbanon hapas sheipsha v'nifseles melecha la'adam. If you have bread that has become moldy and it's no longer edible by a person, a human being does not eat it, it's inedible. V'hakelev yachal, but the dog can still eat it. So the din is mitame tumas oichalin b'kabetza. The brisa rules that it has the din of being mitame other oichel if it's a size of kabetza. Therefore, if it became tameh, it has a power to mitame other oichel. V'nisrefes imatmeya b'Pesach, and on erev Pesach you can burn it with your truma tahara. In other words, this itself is something that anyways is tameh, whereby you're not being mitame b'yodayim. So you can go ahead and burn on erev Pesach together with your truma tahara. That means even the machmir opinion says it's not fitting for a person at all, and therefore it's mutter l'tam b'yodayim. So here we're talking about if it was truma tahara, you go ahead and burn it on erev Pesach again because it's not fitting for human consumption. So everybody would agree over here that is permissible. You're not being matam b'yodayim. Akoponim, the Gemara says, Mishum Rabbi Nasin Amru. Rabbi Nasin argues, and he says, Eino metame. If let's say it's going to be the size of a kibetza, it will not metame other foods. Why? Because he says it's still edible by a dog, and therefore it doesn't have this. Since it's edible by a dog, it loses its status as being something as an oichel, because it's not edible by a human being. Now, there's the first Tana holds that since it's edible by a human being, granted it lost that edibility, but it still maintains its status as something that can be metame. Whereas Rabbi Nasin says, once it's no longer edible by a human being, even though it's edible by a dog, it loses its status as an oichel. So therefore it's not metame. So Gemara asks, Kiman Aslo Hodisnan, like who does the following Mishnah go like? Kilal Omru B'Taharos. The Mishnah states there's a klal, a principle in regards to Taharos. Kolam Yuchal La'oichel Adam Tamei Ashi Yiposem Le'echel Le'kelef. All that is miyuchad for a person to eat, that is tamei, becomes tamei until it's possible from eating by eating from a dog. That means that a human being no longer can then eat it, but a dog can still eat it. So, who is this like? Kiman, who is this like that says Kolam Yuchal La'oichel Adam, something that was edible by a person, is tamei until the dog can no longer eat it also. So even if a person no longer can eat it, but a dog can still eat it, it's going to be metame. Kiman, who is this like? The look Rabbi Nasin, not like Rabbi Nasin, because Rabbi Nasin says it loses its status as an oichel. Whereas the Tanakama said it still, although it cannot be eaten by a human being, still has a status as an oichel. And therefore it's metame if it's a kibetza. The Gemara brings another brisa, Tanu Rabbanon Arevas Abdonin Shenosan Lesoicha Kemach. We have somebody who's a tanner, and he has a bowl that he tans inside of. Typically, they put the flour and they mix it with dung, and they put leather inside of it. They put hides inside of it to make it into leather, and they mix it together. So it says over here, if it's toich shloisha yomim chay levar, if it's within 3 days of Pesach, then it still has a shame of chametz, and therefore you'd have to mevar. Kodem shloisha yomim eino chayiv levar. But if it's before 3 days of Pesach, then we say that the bowl is so pungent, it's so repulsive that it destroys also the flour as being something that's considered to be something for chametz. It would not be edible, and therefore it's something that is going to be Eino Chayiv Levar. Omer Rabbi Nasin argues on the Tanakama. Bamed Devar Mamun. When is this so that it's going to be within 3 days that you do not have to, that you would have to yes mevayer? Shaloi Nasan Leseichoi Oros. That's when you didn't put Oros inside. It only has the flour. Aval Nasan Leseichoi Oros afidu toich shloisha ein chayiv levar. But he argues and says once you put Oros, then that really makes the flour going to be disgusting immediately, inedible immediately, whereby that you would not have to mevayer. So he argues on the Tanakama, because the Tanakama was mashma even if you put aros within the first 3 days. Omar Rava says the halacha ki Rabbi Nosson. That's the halacha. And he adds to explain Rabbi Nosson Shita, afilu yoim echod, v'afilu sho achas. The moment you put in the aros together with the flour, even if it's going to be a moment, that itself, a moment before Pesach itself makes it so you don't have to mevar such chametz.